welcome to this session on day 3 of the Better Learning Leadership Conference, where our focus is on teacher support and development. I'm Karen, Senior Professional Learning and Development Consultant at Cambridge University Press, and I'm your host for today's session with Silvana. Before I introduce Silvana, just a couple of admin points to share with you. Firstly, PowerPoint slides won't be shared, but we will be recording the session, so you'll be able to view it later this week on our YouTube. But do bear in mind, interactive sessions like this one, where there'll be breakout rooms, won't be recorded in full. Secondly, if you RSVP'd to the invite to this event, you'll be sent a certificate of attendance and a link to the recordings. Oh, and please keep your microphones off during the session unless Silvana specifically asks you to put them on. So on to the session. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Silvana, who is Head of Education at Bell Educational Services and Programme Quality Manager at the Bell Foundation, which is a UK-based charity that commissions and disseminates research, carries out leadership work in policy circles, and trains staff in primary and secondary schools. Silvana is also a guest lecturer on English as an additional language at the Faculty of Education in Cambridge University, and co-author of some white papers for Cambridge, including this wonderful one on effective teacher development. So today, Silvana will be talking about key insights and lessons learned about professional development during the pandemic and how these can be integrated into post-pandemic professional learning. And I've know in some of our networking sessions, that's something that some of you have talked about. So it's certainly an area of interest. So over to you, Silvana.
Thank you very much, Karen, and good morning from me, from Cambridge. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be in the world, and welcome to this session. I hope you get something out of it. If we look back at the upsetting and disruptive circumstances in which we were all over the last 16 months or so, we would say actually that it was a textbook catalog of conditions that militate against any kind of professional learning. If you think about everything we know and everything we've read and learned about the conditions that are conducive for learning and professional learning to take place, it was just the opposite. So very quickly, if you look at what happened there, we felt under threat in terms of our own health and well-being and the health and well-being of the people we love and care for. We were feeling very uncertain at times about our future. Will we keep our job? Will our schools remain open? What will happen to us and those we love? We were working, part of the time we were working in isolation from our colleagues. So all that, yeah, of course there was a remote the remote connection and all that, but the genuine interaction that's always present in staff rooms and talking to colleagues and all that wasn't there. And we are relational beings as, first as teachers and then as managers. So that really took a hit. We were switch tasking when we were working remotely. We were looking after our families, caring for children, in some case, homeschooling them. And I say switch tasking is the accurate way of calling, we inaccurately call multitasking, this thing of, switching on and off tasks, which really is an attempt to any kind of quality thinking and quality learning. And of course, all that had an impact on our cognitive load. And if you think as well about the different phases over these months, around, for example, the move from face-to-face to online learning and then coming back, and helping our teachers and supporting our teachers in that return to schools, but within a completely different ballgame of social distancing and masks and not being able to do pair work and group work in the way that we've always known and cherished. Maybe some of you we had to prepare our teachers to work in a hybrid setting, which is the most complex setting ever any teacher could go through. I mean, is there any wonder that there was a massive feeling of excessive cognitive load? So as I say, all these are, conditions that totally mitigate against learning. And yet, what we have experienced is just the opposite. In fact, teacher learning during the pandemic was amazing. There was an exponential growth in teacher learning. We've learned so much, and they have really risen to the challenge, totally embraced the challenge, and learned so much. So that's, let's just throw away the books, really, in terms of what they say about conditions for learning to take place. Anyway, so what I would describe the pandemic and, its aftermath and what's been happening pretty much until now is a bit of a perfect storm. And this perfect storm actually created conditions for teachers to engage, in a way, in a completely different way, with sustained motivation, determination, and commitment to develop the necessary both pedagogical and digital skills to cope with the most, I mean, let's just not mince our words, the most significant global disruption to education in living memory. So for me, this is a fascinating moment to look at what happened. How did this perfect storm that happened in the most adverse circumstances to education create such optimal conditions for teacher learning? But more importantly, what can we learn about teacher learning from this disruption that might help us design even better and more impactful continuing professional development programs in the future, post pandemic, as we plan? Um, in the UK, we are looking forward to the 19th of July when we are, able to not even be forced to wear masks, and it's our decision what we want to do. So the famous new normal. Again, how can we take these lessons forward into the new circumstances? So the first thing I want us to do is to do a little bit of thinking together. And the first activity is we're going to be using the chat box. And I'm going to ask you, don't do anything yet until I'll give you an example as well. So what do you think in your context that were the ingredients that led to such optimal conditions for teacher learning over the last 15 or 16 months? So for example, let's get the obvious one out of the way. Well, needs must, the need to learn was absolutely obvious. So, nobody would dare to argue the need to learn to work remotely, to use web conferencing software like Zoom. I mean, did you have anybody asking in your staff room? I don't think so. I didn't have any in my staff room saying, why do we need to learn to use Zoom? Or, to work in a socially distanced way or to work in a hybrid way. Whatever it was, the need to learn was absolutely obvious, like never before, I would have thought. So that's one example. So now, if you can think for a little while and think about, what were those ingredients? What actually happened that created that perfect storm? And if you can type your answers, and I'll be looking at your answers, that would be great. Thank you. So some answers are coming up. Resilience, ease of access, absolutely, and time available due to lockdown. For some people would say that they had less time available. So that's interesting that people had different experiences. Necessity. Sandra says commitment to students and not wanting to let them down. A sense of responsibility. Sharing ideas and strategies with colleagues. Urgency. Immediate feedback. It either worked or it didn't, which when it did, it was great. Keeping the business going, that's a very strong, absolutely argument. Keeping the students engaged, motivation, quite a few of you saying motivation, willingness, again, the idea of sharing ideas. Okay. Social need for the students and for the teachers themselves, sharing new methods, supporting parents. Motivation again, novelty, passion for teaching, a sense of community while being, so this need to create a community while being isolated, absolutely, yes. Well, keep your responses coming if you've got any left. Okay, wonderful experience. not wanting to be left behind, sharing students' families' urgency. So the urgency is not just for themselves and for the students, but also for the families. Yeah, having to support the families. Thank you so much. Okay, I would agree with all of that actually. So if you like, the map of this session is as follows. So first, I'm going to be sharing with you what I thought were the ingredients for optimal teacher learning in my own experience and in my own context. Then I'm going to be looking at and comparing that experience during that perfect storm with what happens in continuing professional development in normal times. So comparing before and during the pandemic, and whether those ingredients are there or aren't there, or in what proportion they are. And I'm going to be asking a lot of questions. And then the third and last part would be to try and integrate key insights from these lessons from disruption into our post-pandemic continuing professional development planning. So how can we integrate those insights into our future plans? Okay, so let's look at those ingredients for optimal teacher learning. We've already discussed that the need to learn was obvious. I'm going to be sharing with you another 5, which I thought were the main ingredients, at least in my context. And as I go through them, I would like you to think about whether they resonate with you or not, and your context, and how, and which ones, etc. So active listening. Okay, first, I'm going to introduce them, and then I'm going to develop them very briefly. So to me, the second key ingredient was that what was learned was totally relevant to the teachers and the students. Um, you mentioned this one, number 3, that there was a sense of urgency. And for me, that urgency had to do with the need to apply what teachers were learning in their own practice quite urgently, actually. That there was a no us and them here. More about this in a minute. Um, that those that were in charge of promoting and supporting the professional development of teachers were only one step ahead from them, sometimes 5 minutes away from them in their own learning and development. I can see some people smiling in recognition. I felt like that a lot of the time. And a lot of the time I felt out of my comfort zone, more in the panic zone than in the comfort zone, actually. And so did my teachers. And finally, a sense of that a lot of the teaching and the learning that we engaged in, I would characterize not just as just in time learning, but also just in the nick of time learning. We were learning it again 5 minutes before we needed to apply it. Okay. So this idea that what was learned was relevant. I mean, again, nobody would argue that it was absolutely important to learn what we were teaching and learning, what teachers were learning to be able to apply to their teaching. And I'm referring to the macro skills of things like, for example, how to use web conferencing software, to the micro skills of how do we annotate so that students can share their screens with others, etc., kind of thing. No need for to worry about buy-in. Buy-in was there all the time from teachers. I just wouldn't it be lovely if we could keep that? And this is what I'm trying to think about here. Number 3, this sense of urgency, this thing that there was, we knew time was a very, very precious and limited resource. So we needed to make the most of it. Our students' learning depended on it. And we've totally got this. So there was absolutely no time for, digging into rabbit holes, for hobby horses, for philosophical discussions, for playing devil's advocate, not even time to get it wrong. We needed to get it right the first time round. I mean, that was the sense of urgency here. No us and them. Lesson number 4, if you like, or ingredient number 4. So, there was none of the usual managers and teachers, suits and workers, and that tension between us and them, and the top downness and the lack of buy. None of that. Because the pandemic did not discriminate between managers and teachers and learners, we were all thrown in this together, and when we remained in this situation together. So there was a very strong feeling that we're all in this together. ingredient number 5, this one step aheadness, this, as I was saying to you, this, there was no time or there was no money. There was no budget to draft in the expert with their pearls of wisdom. We absolutely had no time for that. So we did need to get to grips with what we were going to teach our teachers, like, as I say, sometimes literally a day before. We were doing our hybrid trials like 2 days before we were due to do CPD with the teachers, for example. And this sense of that we were one step ahead of them, I felt that it created such a positive atmosphere that teachers were much more patient, understanding, empathetic, sympathetic with us. And there was much more collaboration, and a sense that we needed to help each other and we were there to support each other. And as I said, this just in time learning, we were just kind of, we couldn't possibly overload anybody because it would mean no learning. So just very bite sized. So that in my organization, we were made really sure that we were just teaching them exactly what they needed to do in that, kind of the minimum that was possible at that right time so that they could apply it. Okay, so that for me is what I would say are the key ingredients that I felt led to such optimal learning from teachers during the pandemic. So can I just ask you to identify which of those 6 ingredients that we have just briefly explored ring true for your own context? So again, using the chat box, if you can type the corresponding number. So for example, if you felt that it's no us and them and just in time learning, just type 4 and 6. And if you feel it's all just right, also, we'll do it quickly to kind of identify, common themes. Thank you. So true. Oh, good. All of them. 1 to 6. Definitely all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 6. All for sure. All of them. 3 and 4. So there is some resonance, I can say. Basically, all of them, all of them, all of them. 1, 3, 2, 3. All of them. All. Okay. So thank you very much. So that's good that, even though we work in different places in the world and under different conditions and in different organizations, we feel identified that, there was something here that we all share. Great. Thank you for that. Okay. So moving on to, now we're going to look back at what I would call CPD in normal times, i.e. without the pandemic getting in the way, and whether those key ingredients are there or not, or in what proportion they're there. So if you would like to think about your own context and try and answer the questions that I'll be posing in your head, that will be really very useful. Again, active listening. And then after that, we're going to be breaking into breakout rooms. Okay, but I'll let you know when we get there. So we said during the pandemic, the need to learn was absolutely obvious, crystal clear to everybody. My question would be, in normal times, is the need to learn equally obvious to every single teacher in the staff room? And even if it is obvious for me as a manager and the person in charge of continuing professional development, is it equally clear to teachers that what the CPD program presents is actually worth learning? In other words, do we bother to make the case for learning something, particularly when the CPD program is organization driven? Or, sometimes I'm so busy and carried away that I just go, well, they've got to learn it, get on with it, and I don't even sometimes stop to think about the importance of making the case. And, all the available evidence in professional learning says that teacher buy-in is related to this, understanding why. Question 2, related to ingredient 2. Is what is taught in CPD in normal times felt as relevant as it was during the pandemic? And in other words, is what is taught in my organization CPD program in normal times directly relevant to every single one of my teachers? And as a manager, I can feel tempted to say, this is a fascinating question to explore, but a little bit pie in the sky. In real life, it can't always be, it can't. Well, I would say, A, it can, B, it should. 3, without this, again, there's no buy-in guaranteed from teachers. Number 3, a sense of urgency. So for me, the question here is, how do we take advantage of and manage time, that precious and limited resource, Sarah Mercer would say, in CPD in normal times? And here I would say, in my experience, and I'm talking about my experience in my organization, but I've been very lucky to observe professional learning in many parts of the world. And I would say, in my experience and observation, there isn't always a sense of urgency during continuing professional development time. And this I see in 2 types, if you like, of time wasters. One, inefficient management of that time. And 2, before I move on to 2, again, there's quite a bit of digging into rabbit holes sometimes in professional development, kind of going back to hobby horses and indulging those hobby horses, those things that I care about, that I'm interested in, that matter to me. A lot of philosophical discussion sometimes. There's nothing wrong with philosophy. I love philosophy. And there's nothing wrong with thinking deeply. But, when they're just an exercise in, devil's advocate, but not necessarily leading anywhere but the philosophical discussions, then I have a little bit of a problem with that. I don't know about you. The second time waster is what I would call ineffective approaches. And I'm going to mention 2. One is, all the available evidence points in this direction, the disconnected one-offs, that unless you really want your teachers to develop awareness of something, quite short, disconnected one-off sessions, as you may very well know, do not necessarily lead to the teachers enacting what they learn in the professional development program into practice. So a little bit of a waste of time. The other thing is the lack of, you don't explore one theme in sufficient depth to enable deep learning, which is the kind of learning that leads to transferability to practice. The other one that's related to that is those sessions that I call death by here's another one. So, you've got this 60-minute session, and here's another strategy, and here's another idea, and here's another suggestion, and you've got 25 in something. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but quantity at the expense of depth. That can be a waste of time, particularly with early career teachers. So is there any wonder that sometimes teachers feel, I've got so much to do and I'm sitting here wasting my time learning nothing much? And I wanted to bring here Professor Mary Kennedy, who talks about the problem of enactment. And I think it's a fundamental concept for us to get our heads around. She says, how a professional development program helps teachers translate, transfer new ideas into their own systems of practice, their repertoires, is important because professional development programs typically meet with teachers outside of the classrooms to talk about teaching, yet they expect their words to alter teachers' behaviors inside the classroom. So there's a massive disconnect there between talking about teaching, the philosophical discussion, and enacting what they're learning into their practice, which is behavior. So Mary Kennedy says professional development programs are at risk of the problem of enactment. Teachers learning and espousing one idea, yet continuing to enact a different idea out of habit without even noticing the contradiction. That's why it's so important to think about this idea of the urgency to apply learning and the creation of conditions for teachers to apply learning as a key part of professional development programs. So questions for you and for me. Are teachers in your professional development events and programs given the time, the guidance, and the support that they need to enact what they learn? And remember that enactment means behavior, and to change your behavior, it takes a long time, a lot of practice, depending on the skills and the behaviors, and they require feedback. So that's the kind of guidance I'm talking about. Are expectations from us about teachers enacting what they learn communicated? So, are we communicating high expectations that we do expect them to apply to their practice what they're learning in CPD, or we just go, here's another interesting idea, take it or leave it? Is teachers' transferability to practice monitored? So are we noticing? Are we observing? Are we watching whether what we're teaching them is actually finding its way to their classrooms? Is it having an impact on their learners' learning? Is it improving their learners' learning? How do we know? Fundamental assessment for learning for me, because if I don't see transferability to practice, then it's not an unfair assumption to make that there's something wrong with the CPD program. Maybe I'm not giving sufficient opportunities for practice. Maybe I'm not giving sufficient feedback. Maybe I'm not giving sufficient scaffolding. Maybe we're not spending enough time. So great assessment for learning to inform future CPD practice. Know us and them. Let's think of ordinary circle, and I'm sure we all try and make sure we are close to our teachers and that there is not this, but sometimes this happens, that there is top-down CPD. I would describe as done at teachers, particularly from the management agenda or the organizational objectives agenda, but with little teacher say. And it shouldn't be either or. You can make sure that, I'm not saying management agenda is bad. I'm not saying that for a minute. I'm not saying prioritizing organizational goals is bad. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, how do we integrate? Also, teachers say, how do we make sure that teachers buy into those organizational goals? So as a result, what we sometimes see when there isn't that attempt is no teacher buy-in. So we get reluctance to take part, we get resistance and cynicism and unwillingness to enact that learning into their practice. So what we sometimes see is this vicious circle, that top-down CPD leads to no teacher buy-in, and managers' perceptions that there is no teacher buy-in leads to a kind of entrenchment into, I need to be controlling the CPD program even more. The jury's out on this one. I do fully appreciate the value of one step aheadness, and it gave us adrenaline, kept us fresh, made us more approachable, more human, more vulnerable, and teachers loved it. And yet, professional literature around, the literature around professional learning keeps talking about the importance of expertise. So I'm going to park that one because I haven't got an answer to that one. Finally, just-in-time learning, I would say, this kind of excessive cognitive load that we saw during the pandemic, I would say is not exclusive of the pandemic. In CPD, in normal times, if you like, I've seen a lot of excessive cognitive load too, which makes me think that there isn't enough just-in-time learning in professional development programs. But that's me. Okay, so thinking about all that, I'm taking 5 key lessons from these 16 months. Quite lazy, 16 months, 5 lessons. They take a lot of work, actually. So let's have a look at, I'll present them very quickly, and then we'll go into breakout rooms and talk about these. So related to the relevance thing, make the need for teachers to learn even more explicit. We've been doing it before, but there's more we can do about it. To ensure that the CPD program is even more relevant. And again, relevance was a big thing in my organization. And we did try and make sure that there was a lot of differentiation etc. But this is really important. Create a sense of urgency to apply learning, particularly in the way we approach the CPD program. Important to decide with the teachers, to learn with the teachers, and to evaluate with the teachers, all in it together. And to increase just-in-time learning. So these are my 5 lessons. I'm going to be talking about them as well later, but this is now time, I think, to break into breakout rooms. And I'm going to let you decide first which 2, at least, you want to develop in more depth. So out of these 5, do you want to talk about which 2 do you want to, 2 or 3, whatever you want to talk about in more depth? And then the question here is, how could you integrate at least 2 of these lessons from disruption into your organization's CPD program? So in other words, if you choose create a sense of urgency to apply learning, how can we do that? What can we do to create that sense of urgency? Okay. If you've got time, then can you add to my own lesson? So are there any other lessons from disruption that you want to add? And then if you have any, can you appoint a speaker to present them very briefly to the rest of the other groups? We won't have more than 10 minutes for this maximum. So I'm going to now set up breakout rooms and let you, if you want to take a photo or screen capture of the screen, that could help you remember what you've got to do. Hello and welcome back. I hope you had interesting conversations. I've eavesdropped in a couple of them. It was very, very interesting thoughts. If you want to add to my lessons from disruption, I think the best way to do this is rather than speak about it, the speaker become a scribe. And can you type into the chat box the group's added lessons, and we'll all have them there in writing, which is great. So now I've been told that I have a little bit more time if I want to. So I will take advantage of that. But if you need to leave, just please leave at 1:45. If not, I'll extend a little bit longer, if you don't mind. These have been my, if you like, my insights from those lessons from disruption. As I said, make the need to learn even more explicit. And here I'm quoting good old Malcolm Knowles, writing in the 1970s about andragogy. And one thing he said was adults need to know why they need to learn something before undertaking to learn it. Therefore, the first task of that in charge of teaching them is to help the learners become aware of the need to know. And at the very least, he says, facilitators can make an intellectual case for the value of the learning in improving the effectiveness of the learner's performance. Very, very relevant to teachers. Why what we are learning here makes you a better teacher, improves your skills. In the context of schools and learning in general, we are familiar, hopefully, with the concept of learning intentions and the importance of sharing learning intentions with the students. So Clark, Timperley, and Hattie describe learning intentions or define learning intentions as what we want our learners to learn in terms of skills, knowledge, attitudes, and values, not just what's in your head. And the idea is that we share those learning intentions with our students, but we share our learning intentions with the teachers that we teach as well. But of course, our learners are not just children, but they're adult learners. So here, I think it's really important to throw in the mix what Malcolm Knowles was saying. So as well as the what we want them to learn, it's important that we articulate to our teachers the why or the what for. But again, so this is an example of what it would look like in practice. So I start a session, and this is where I articulate from the very beginning up front. I'm going to let you read in silence. Okay, so that's an example of the what we share the learning intentions, and the what for. But of course, we're not just teaching adult learners, we're teaching teachers. And this is why just sharing the learning intentions and the what for is incomplete, because teachers learn to create better learning for their students. So learning intentions just focus on what teachers need to learn. So it's only fair that a teacher should ask themselves, this is fascinating stuff, but how will my learning this that I'm learning today benefit my students? And this is where I suggest very strongly that we add what we call intended impact statements to the mix. And what are intended impact statements? Well, that is telling the teachers how the school, the staff, but particularly their own students will benefit from the teachers learning something. This is what Weston and Clay call the so that or the so what. So the question we as planning CPD is, how will our students in the school benefit from our teachers learning this? And this is a frame that I've been using that I think you might find useful for sharing impact statements with teachers at the start of CPD sessions. In this workshop, webinar, course, etc., we or you, depending on what you want to say, and then you say what teachers will learn or gain, and those are your learning intentions, and of course the what for, but also the so that. So what we're sharing here is the reasons for learning it, not just in terms of their own practice, but fundamentally about benefits for their students. So here is an example, the same example we've looked at before, but this time with so that, i.e. intended impact statements added as well. Have a look. And this is how you create relevance, by making it evident and very directly related, not just with their learning, but with student learning. There you go. As I said, linking learning, student learning with teacher learning, and then the famous idea of differentiating. So just a quick comment, really important to start thinking CPD from the point of view of not what the teachers want to learn, but what the students, their students, need to learn. Because that then helps me think about what the teachers need to learn, and then it helps me identify what the continuing professional development program needs to include. A quick reminder of the importance of differentiating. We know this, that not all teachers have the same knowledge, experience, depth of expertise. So it's really important to adapt teacher learning to make it appropriate to all. And I can hear you say, that's all very well and good, but I ain't got the time, ain't got the money. Okay, a couple of ideas here. You could, of course, create different choices of topics and activities, and that is the expensive and time-consuming way, sometimes necessary. But there's a much more, I would say, time saving and practical way of differentiating, which is the more and less approach. And you think of, for example, if you realize that some teachers, particularly new teachers, lack sort of secure knowledge of something, you can add a little bit of self-study material, or demonstrations or videoed models or worked examples, or accompanied by analysis and reflection tasks. You can do that in Moodle or your learning platform or websites or whatever, whereas and more guidance, whereas your more experienced and expert teachers will kind of don't need that much of that. They need less of that, and what they need more of is more experimentation. So quick introduction, go into try and experiment, evaluation, and more autonomy. So play with that more and less. What do I need to supplement? What do I need to fast track? Okay. Creating a sense of urgency to apply learning. Well, this is a very quick 3 words. Set high expectations of transferability to practice. I do that all the time. We do that in my organization. We don't just learn because it's nice to learn. We learn to apply. We learn to implement what we learn into practice. monitor, as I said, transferability. We do a lot of observation. We do learning walks to ensure that we know what's going on. And again, we design and redesign CPD that ensures transferability to practice. Let me give you a couple of very quick examples. 2 formats of CPD. Format 1, share good practice. This session where 60-minute session where you got Dan, teacher 1, talking about how he uses the famous share good practices. 20 minutes of how I use Canva, followed by Maria, how I use Mentimeter, followed by Anna, how I use Padlet. Result: excessive cognitive load and superficial coverage. Does this model or format lead to transferability? Highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. It leads to, I might want to try, that's interesting. I might want to try that. And then Monday comes and I've got to plan and I forget about it. Format 2, what I call from input to impact. So this is a series of sessions, not just the one, where I start with input. It doesn't matter how, if it's me or an expert or a video or a reading material, it doesn't matter. What matters is we're teaching something new. And when we teach something new, we state why, we state what we're learning, we state the intended impact, then we present it and we explain how it works and we demonstrate how it works, not just for the students, because typically a lot of CPD ends with, this is how it works for the students. We need to also show the teacher experience and the potential problems that teachers might have and what problems and what solutions. 2, a moment we're all planning together. So we're planning to use this, and there's joint planning and there's peer feedback. So a lot of conversation with colleagues. And then we spend a time that we decide, a week, 2 weeks, a month, where we're all implementing an aspect of that that's relevant to my context, my students, my class, what I teach, etc. So ongoing experimentation and ongoing evaluation. So teachers not just doing it and applying it, but also noticing, is it working? How well is it working? What if I did this? And then sharing the experimentation experiences and evaluating together. Shall we try and do it again? Next time, what shall we add or change? Shall we drop this? What impact is it having? This is much more likely to lead to transferability than format 1, share good practices. So very quickly, a word on decide, learn and evaluate together. Really important, I'm sure you do this already, consult teachers about the what they want to learn and the how they want to learn it. Really important, the literature says a lot, mentions this a lot, that it's important for us CPD leaders to participate both as leader but also as learner, that they see us learning something new, doing the activities, that we design supported opportunities for peer, teacher and learning. And the stress here is on supported. Sharing good practices and just say, what you want to talk about today? Canva, fab. And you, Mentimeter, fab. That's not supported. That's abdicated. Scaffolding teachers, letting them talk to you about what they want to do. And you asking questions, because sometimes teachers are very busy. They don't plan the share good practice. And they don't think about what their colleagues need. So your questions really guide there. Get teacher feedback on the quality and impact of the CPD program. Don't be afraid to seek feedback and use that teacher feedback and data on impact to inform further CPD. And finally, just-in-time learning. I'm going to increase it. And a reminder, if you remember this word, beta, it might help you remember what I mean by just-in-time learning. Bite-sized chunks of content, little but often, at the exact time when teachers need it, to be applied immediately. So there's no, it's up to you. No, we're going to apply this and you're going to come back and tell me how it went. So to close this, as Pope Francis said, the basic rule of a crisis is that you don't come out of it the same. For me, this crisis has made me think a lot about professional development, and I intend to fully benefit from it. And I invite you to do the same. It's in your power. You are the manager, you're the CPD leader. It's in your power to make at least 1 or 2 changes. So thank you very much for being here until the end. I overran my 10 minutes, so thank you very much for bearing with me, and take care.
Thank you, Silvana. That was a hugely valuable session. I think we all recognize that the teaching community really kind of developed hugely and embraced kind of remote learning when it was thrust on them so suddenly. And it's great to be able to look at why they managed that so successfully and think about how that can be incorporated into teacher development practice going forward. And I thought your practical suggestions at the end were really great. And I think the impact studies, I saw a couple of comments saying how valuable those were. So it's really great. And if any of you are available later on at 3 o'clock UK time, there is a networking session where you can discuss together, discuss anything about post-pandemic CPD further, along with teacher collaboration and teacher leadership. We have a session coming up in 5 minutes which actually draws on some of the things that Silvana has outlined in the white paper about effective professional development, and looks at questions around quality assurance. How can you ensure that the professional development, if you're looking at expert providers, how can you ensure that it really is quality? So do pop along to that if you can, and I hope to be able to talk to some of you later. I've had some great conversations so far this week. Thank you again, Silvana.
Thank you for having me.